So the story so far, so the workshop we've had so far, we've covered energy saving basics, energy use and understanding about our bills, energy saving bigger things, you know, like insulating our homes, etc. Renewable power and renewable heating. Last time we looked at assessing our climate impact and how to cut our emissions. And we had a conversation about, you know, how to do carbon footprints and how to go at that. We also talked about, it's not just about cutting the carbon. We talked about how to, what sustainability is and how to move to more sustainable sort of lives anyway, you know, what that might actually look like. So today we're going to look at the transition. So we talked last time about cutting the carbon and moving to transition, you know, moving to sustainable lives, but how do we actually get there? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So as part of today's session, we're going to consider what a transitioned life or community might actually look and feel like, you know. We're going to envisage that, I don't know if I spelt that right, have a look at that for ourselves. There's a little film I want to show you and there's an exercise for us to do. We're going to explore the transition and we're going to hear about the Transition Towns movement. They've been working on this for over 15 years, transitioning to more sustainable ways of living and working. We're going to hear hopefully from a representative from a local transition community and consider how we can co-produce and lead in that transition so that community can play an equal role in that process alongside hopefully local and central government. Have you got your hand up, Kevin?
He has, yeah.
What can I do for you?
I just wondered if we're going to touch on the recent announcement that all bus fares have been reduced to £2, because this is, in my view, in fact, we raised it at a meeting just the other week, although I was zoomed in, so I'm not sure if my point was made. But Germany's done very similar. They've dropped 90% of all public transport bills, and by reducing the bus fares to £2 per journey for most of them. This is exactly what society needs. It happens to be what we need for in the current fuel situation with the war going on and general fuel poverty. But I've just calculated, just as you were speaking there, Marion, that it's actually cheaper for me to now walk half a mile, catch a bus to work, walk half a mile to work, and then back again. And not only is it cheaper, but I get my daily exercise in as well. Oh, so I might be switching from car to bus while that's happening, at least on those days when I don't think I've got to use it again for work.
I hadn't heard that. And if you want to stick a note in the chat, obviously you've said it in the recording, so that's helpful, but no more details about that would be really good if you happen to have a link to it or something. But we won't talk about it now because we've got quite a full agenda on this item, but it's really good to hear that. And yeah, I'd be keen to fully understand it as well, and I'm sure everybody else would. Anyway, thanks for that, Kevin. So this is the agenda for today. So we'll kick off. Let's see how for this. Okay, so our response to the emergency. So we've got, obviously we're living with the climate emergency, and we've got kind of 3 or 4 things that we actually have to do in response to that. Obviously, we need to mitigate, we need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that are being emitted every day across the planet to much more sustainable levels. We need to adapt because some of the emissions that have been, well, a lot of it, you know, so much, we've let it so long that we won't be able to, even if we get to net zero, we're not operating net negative, which is actually eating away at the excessive emissions that we've had for so long. So we need to be able to adapt to the inbuilt warming that is now occurring because of the way we've been living for so long. So we've got to change the way we live. I mean, this isn't tinkering around the edges. This is whole system change that we need to do and transition to a better life. Basically, that's you know, if we're going to make these big changes, let's make it worthwhile for us all. It's not just what can we do that's the least painless, but actually how can we make life better? I know after the Second World War, when people came back, you know, they'd endured incredible, when they came back, and also those people living here, endured incredible privations and horrendous experiences. And they wanted a new world, you know, a fairer deal and fairer opportunities. And that needs to be our motivation too. If we're going to make these enormous changes, let's make it life better for all of us. So responding to the climate emergency requires sort of whole system life changes. Much about our lives at present is not great. Sorry, we have to move this because it's in the way. It's not great. And we want to change those things anyway. So could we make changes to respond to the climate emergency, which also make our lives better? I think so. I hope you think so. Give me a minute. So what would a good life actually look like? And how do we get to there from here? You know, I mean, we listened to the talk last night about from field to fork to plate, whatever, I've got the phrase now. How do we actually get there from where we are at the moment? Okay, some of you have seen this film before, but I want to just show you a film to remind us, because I think with all big changes in our lives, we have to have a real good reason why we want to do it. And a real good reason, a real good desire for what we're trying to create and where we're trying to get to. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but I just want to re-show you this film if it's okay. Let's go to the back.
Anything we ever achieved started with someone imagining it first. So if we can't imagine a way out of the climate crisis, it just can't happen. We know that the crisis is getting worse every single day, and many of us are losing hope for our future. But despair is not an option. We must rise up and meet the greatest challenge of our lives with stubborn optimism. And imagining is the first step. So, are you ready to imagine? In this critical decade, the biggest tree planting campaign in history is sucking billions of tons of carbon out of the air. And forests and indigenous lands, they're protected. This is what your city looks like. It's green, I mean everywhere. Streets are pedestrian and kid-friendly. Food growing on rooftops, in car parks, which by the way, we don't need anymore because we don't own cars anymore. And here's something. Birds. Can you imagine your city as a sanctuary for nature and wildlife? There are solar panels on every rooftop across the globe. Clean, interconnected energy lights every home, every clinic, every school. We no longer choke on the toxic fumes of fossil fuels. It's not hard to imagine. This technology already exists. And what about the millions of new jobs created? Are you picturing it? Really picturing it? Roads, they're green too. Traffic's cut right down. Public transport everywhere is electric, dependable, and free. Can you smell the air? Clean. Farming, all regenerative, which means healthy soil and better food. And we don't eat much meat. Can you imagine what we could do with a third of the world's cropland currently used to grow animal feed? Here's something to imagine. Fields of seaweed, miles long, grown in oceans that cross the planet. They draw down billions of tons of carbon, restore sea life, and guess what? They're a limitless source of protein-rich food. And we can do so much more. Rewild our land, protect our cities from rising sea levels, restore coral reefs. These things we're imagining, they're all possible now, just with technology that's available today. We are the last generation that can prevent catastrophic runaway climate change. We cannot give up. Anything we ever achieved started with someone imagining it first. This is the decade to make this imagined future happen. Share this video and help those around you have the courage to imagine it too.
I like watching that film. It's really important, I think, that as we are thinking about, we can think about all the difficulties, the challenges that we face, but where do we want to go to? And that gives us a little bit of a flavour of where we want to go to, how we want life to be. Because it'd be good to know when we get there, just be able to recognise it. So I just want to spend a little bit of time with you tonight, just helping us to think that out. What would a sustainable life look like? We talked about it a little bit last time, but what would it feel like? What would it look like? How might we experience that? Do anybody want to kick off, share some thoughts on this? I'll write them down. Jonathan will write them down. So what would it mean to each of you? What would that world that we dream of actually look like? I've got my magic wand. So if you can wave your magic wand, the batteries don't work anymore. Maybe I need a solar connection, but you know. I think you've got your hand up, Greg. Did you want to say something?
Public transport.
It looks like public transport. What does that mean?
No,
let's get into the feelings of this, not just the words. What are the feelings of this?
free public transport. If we want to get rid of cars, then public transport needs to be changed in a big way.
So we'd have free public transport, did you say, or better public transport?
Or close to free. Yeah,
and everybody would feel comfortable about using it.
So free or nearly free public transport.
I think in the future, people aren't going to be worrying about that because they probably won't have cars. They'll be able to call on cars where there'll be transport as a service, TaaS, and taxis won't cost the earth like they do. Those are just some things.
So reduce cars and hardly any cars actually?
Yeah, much less cars.
Okay, Jane had a hand up then.
I am writing all this down, Marion, so you carry on doing what you're doing. All right.
Right. Okay, Jane
The
had a hand up.
is,
What does it look like to you, Jane?
I feel it's a much more community-based society. If you're talking about how it makes you feel, I think everybody would feel okay about using public transport, because currently a lot of people just wouldn't. So how do we get to change that? I saw a thing on Twitter the other day. It said a developed society is one where rich people use public transport, not where poor people have cars. So it needs to be much more egalitarian society, doesn't it?
So what does community-based mean for you? I mean, I know that you're saying those words, but what does that evoke for you, community-based?
So a greater willingness for people to engage with their neighbours over things like sharing large items that people would normally own one of. So, you know, you'd have your library of things where stuff can be hired out and shared. I think people would need to get used to shared open spaces being the norm, as opposed to everybody aspiring to have their own garden, because we will need to live much more in apartment blocks in cities if we're going to leave enough of the countryside to let nature thrive. So, yeah, I'll shut up for now.
So obviously with a library of things, that starts to reduce people's need for us all to own everything ourselves.
Yes.
One version of everything.
And people would feel fulfilled by giving to their community rather than by having stuff.
So fulfillment by sharing.
Yeah, sort of bartering of goods, services.
Yeah. yeah, I'll babysit your son, and you'll give me some of your tomatoes that you've grown on your allotment, whatever.
And it has a different quality to it as well. It's not just when you're sharing and helping like that. It's not just it's not like just a financial exchange. There's something else to it, isn't there? There's sort of like the real desire to help each other and be supportive to each other because you like each other. Oh, maybe that's it. Maybe community is about people actually getting to know each other better and hopefully like each other, maybe.
So is that a point, Marion? People like each other.
Yeah, because I think as human beings, if we don't know each other, it's hard for us to, we become more fearful of each other. But if we know more of each other, we've got a chance of liking each other anyway, haven't we? We might not, but we've got a chance of doing that. But a lot of I think breakdowns in relationships happen because there are no relationships, or there's not the opportunity to get to know each other and develop that. What do they say? Friends are the people, friends are the strangers you haven't met yet. So it's that sort of sense of let's get to know each other and let's work together and value each other. Did you want to say anything else, Jane? Or are you okay?
No, that's fine for now. Thank you.
I think Harry was next.
Yeah, how are you?
I just want to pick up on what Greg was talking about and it's a bit abstract. People worry. And I think we need to understand the kind of worries that people have and start to work on eliminating them.
What do you mean? Sorry, with regards to public transport?
No, life.
No.
I was 33 before I realized I wasn't working. I was self-employed and I realized I wasn't working for me. I was working for the bank. It was a real shock because I hadn't thought of it like that. I'd been a student with an overdraft, gone out to work, carried an overdraft, carried credit card liabilities just to get by. And then it just dawned on me, the only reason I was working was to pay off this debt that I'd accumulated once I'd left the cocoon of my parental home.
So maybe it's having a sense, so in the dreamland, it's having a sense of our needs and how
no,
we.
Sorry, I'm really being abstract, and I think that in envisioning a utopia or a better life, a better word, we need to understand what people worry about, and then address the needs. So to help them not worrying. Like, for example, my children, I know, were bullied at school, but we didn't hear about it. But that has produced a generation of people who were bullied at school, who carry with them, whether it motivates them to be different and strive to not be bullied or whatever. But it's something that shouldn't have happened in a world where everybody's equal and everybody values each other.
A safe space where we're all listening to each other then is what's needed.
I'm just saying that if we are envisaging this future, what you're envisaging is factual things, which is great. But if we were more abstract, and rather than looking at specific examples of what would make life better, try to understand what it is that, in the sense of the widest community, what individuals worry about. Do they worry about when their children are out being run over? Do they worry about is traffic noise something that triggers off something, like will my children get run over when they cross the road? So I'm sorry, but it is to understand worries and then address the solution and see whether that ends up. So yes, absolutely, free public transport or subsidized public transport, or even a pandemic. We had where I side of a trunk road, We've never heard birds in 30 odd years, and it was absolutely magical. And everyone wanted to go back to normal, and it was, my normal. And I don't want to wish a pandemic on anybody, but my normal would be exactly what we enjoyed for that brief period a couple of years ago. But, sorry.
So I mean, it's important to hear people's anxieties, their concerns, to see then where those concerns might link to in ourselves. Maybe, if we have those concerns, it will link to a need, in the sense of we obviously don't trust that that a situation will be safe for either ourselves or our loved ones. So what need is that highlighting? And then how can we listen to that? I think when it comes to living a more sustainable life, for me, the first point is to listen and consider and feel, what's really important to me and what are my fundamental needs in my life. I mean, I did this bit of work a few years ago, and it was amazing to realize that my needs ended up being about 8 or 9 main things. And actually, when I shared those needs with others, I identified them, I heard that they had similar needs. And then the revelation became that actually we could, meeting those needs did also have some commonality to it as well. So actually, I think it's important. I know you said that you might feel that's a bit vague, but actually life for us is about our humanness, isn't it? And we're living with things that excite us and things that scare us. And actually, the more we understand that, and we recognize that we are often, where we are now is a gathering of our experience over life, it's important to consider it. And I'll go on to talk about the Transition Towns movement in a minute, but one very big part of it for me wasn't just about let's change our energy solutions from this to that or whatever. It was about changing the way we live together and how we relate to each other, and helping us to be good together, and that for me is at the heart of a sustainable community, how we can live together well. And part of that is understanding our concerns. So thanks for that, Harry.
Ben had his hand up for a little bit. It's gone down now, but
who was that?
Kevin?
Kevin.
Yes, I think we've probably covered the topic as much as we need to. So I shan't contribute now. I'll save my time for later.
So you don't want to share what would excite you about a new world, a new way of being, with your magic wand?
Well, since you press, I'm happy to. I would like to say I love the philosophical view of Harry there, and from Jane, the practical items library, which seems to me to be encapsulated by a term which I'll try and coin here, each according to his need. But for me, I would love to see local utilities generating all the power that we need. So where we can have wind power locally, biodigesters, thorium maybe, lots of solar all around the estates. So there's no longer a need or a pressure for nations to go to war over resources. So we have no more oil wars, no more imperial grabs for what's in the global south or the Middle East or anywhere else. I would love to see that motivation for war removed. And I would also like to see all the utility companies go bust, because we're just generating locally and able to have sustainable sources of power and energy. So we can do other things like reach for the stars, like really become the humanity that some visionaries have seen in the past, rather than the dystopia that we seem to be constantly driven towards.
Thank you.
Jane's got a hand up again. I'll say again, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I suppose what I wanted just to say in response to that is that because of our as a human society, our focus on growth, we need to be really careful to manage our demand for energy as well as the supply, because there's a real danger that if we just bring new supply streams on board, our need expands to use up the new supply without being able to switch off the old one. So we still need to understand that having stuff and buying stuff and traveling in aeroplanes all the time is not it does not make us better human beings or happier human beings. It clearly doesn't.
So last week we talked about living within the Earth's resources, the Earth's renewable resources, not necessarily the Earth's capital resources. So living within that sort of means. So hopefully, I mean, for me, around sustainability is understanding the Earth's limits and the finiteness of our situation, but also understanding how to live with the renewable nature of Earth, the renewable nature of ourselves, of the planet, and live with that comfortably, the patterns of nature. So I'm mentioning that as well in what you were saying, Jane. Thank you. Anybody else want to share a bit of a vision for what they see as the place that people want to get to?
I'd have a different wand, and I'd stop animals being farmed for food.
Yeah,
because
so
80% of the world being used for feeding animals and growing animals for humans. So if you got rid of, I don't know, half of them, you've then got 40% of the world left.
So that's
have wild animals, bring wildlife back in, to give people and nature a space to recover, because at the moment, sorry about my language, we're literally completely wrecking the world by our greed. And I just think if we don't do something about it, and seriously, and address the fact that things need to cost what they need to cost. So for instance, if you look at milk, when we used to all get it from the milk when it was a set price, wasn't it? And then basically it's been, over the last 10 or 20 years, it's just been put as a loss leader, sold for pennies, and there's no value to it. Whereas there used to be a real value to having a pint of milk. It used to be something that was treasured. And you could say the same thing about meat, although like that's not my thing at all. Things are just not valued anymore on that, and there needs to be a radical restructuring of how we see food and the environment, and how we use animals in particular, to basically sort of feed ourselves.
So if you waved your magic wand then, Jonathan, what would you see as your desired thing? So what you don't want is gone, but what you do want, what does that look like?
I think we need to have a healthy, educated population that understands that actually we don't need to kill animals to eat to start off with, but certainly we don't need to wipe out huge swathes of the rainforest to feed McDonald's and their burgers, for instance. We don't need to, as the speaker at last night's call was indicating, fill cattle with lots of hormones so that they grow quicker and can die younger. I just think it's an awful situation where actually, if that's the solution to the world hunger crisis, is to fill animals with chemicals so they grow up in pain, and you eat something that is potentially poisonous for you, I think the world's gone mad. And I think there's got to be a more serious and sustainable way ahead, because that's like everybody taking penicillin. If everybody's taking penicillin, all the animals are fed penicillin, then we will become immune to penicillin. The next big drug, next big thing comes along, and it will kill us all, because it just won't work. And it's exactly the same with how we're treating animals and how we're treating nature. We need to have a serious rethink and start and go, okay, if you want to buy meat, it's going to cost more, because it actually does cost a lot more to produce than we're able to buy it for at the moment. So
it's valuing and respecting each other and all beings.
Absolutely.
Living like we mean it,
getting back to sort of, I think, almost, I know sort of things like vegetarianism and veganism wasn't a big thing in the 70s and 80s, but people used to respect their food. And I know as a proportion of the household budget, it might have been more than it is now, but I think we've sort of got to get back to that idea where we're actually sort of like not covering everything in plastic and filling it with chemicals. And this goes for plants as well, is that we need to get back to a more sustainable way of doing things. That, as the farmer said last night, we need to respect the soil. We need to, rather than just sort of trying to sort of, I don't know, fill everything with chemicals to make it grow quicker, we need to make systems work and work in balance, like a permaculture sort of way of thinking about things.
So for me, I would like to be able to grow food, to learn how to grow food, that we grow food in our communities, that it's a closer thing. That, you know, we heard obviously the gentleman who was a farmer talking last night, actually have a connection with the, you know, I still live in a village in Shropshire, surrounded by fields. I looked out my window, I could see fields, but none of the food grown in the fields around me would ever land on my plate because it goes off somewhere else. It's, you know, there's no connection. So my connection is with the supermarket or maybe a bit of food that I grew in the garden, but actually to have that local connection with the food that we're eating, understanding how it all works, maybe taking part in it. And obviously he talked about how many people in a community used to take part, particularly in harvesting food, and really valuing and appreciating the food that lands on our plate and how it gets there, and hopefully being involved in that in some way as well. I see you've got your hand up, Jane. Is there anything else?
Has had for a while.
I'm really sorry.
I just want to craft something here.
I just want to say that, however, whatever the sustainable lifestyle looks like in the future, it's got to work with human nature, and there will always be people who don't want to grow their own food, who don't want to understand why you're doing things this way. Living a sustainable lifestyle now is really difficult because you have to make loads and loads of choices all the time, and you'd have to take those choices away from people without them feeling like they're deprived, but just so that you don't have to make a choice as between sustainable and unsustainable. You've only got one choice, and that's just natural for everybody, because there will always be people who don't, you know, just don't care. Some people are just like that. Some people will always throw their McDonald's wrappers out of the window, you know, their car as they drive along. And unfortunately, that's what happens. So you can't rely on people like that having a change of heart and going, you know, actually, so I'm going to care about the environment, because they won't. It's just got to be part of the system.
But you can change the system to make it less easy for these people
to
get away with these things. You can make, like, for instance, the McDonald's wrappers. If you printed a receipt on the McDonald's wrappers with the last 4 digits of their credit card number, because nobody's going to be using cash in the near future, then that would be traceable back to them, so they would be responsible for it. Things like that are quite easy and simple to do. It's not. We had an incident of fly tipping on our allotment, and somebody left the address labels of the person who they worked for. So of course we traced it and found out who did it. That's the same sort of thing. It's taking some sort of ownership, and unfortunately, in our system, be it government or personally, nobody has a responsibility at the moment, and it's a responsibility not just for people. It's for businesses. Businesses are trying to sort of buy everything as cheap as they can and selling it for as much as they can, and there's a massive gulf of responsibility there. So that's the only way it's going to be sustainable.
Okay, so I think thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and I'd invite you to continue to think about. I know there are lots of things that we need to unravel in ourselves to even be able to imagine this land that we'd like to create, but it's worth considering that. And I suppose when I watch that film, it sort of just taps into my feeling about how things could be, and I reckon, I mean, I have felt that when I've stayed in different communities, and I suppose, you know, I think if we want to create more sustainable ways of living and being, it's understanding it's not just about changing systems and processes, it's actually why we're doing it, coming back to ourselves, the challenges of doing that. And, you know, one day we might believe one thing or feel one thing, and the next day we feel another one, because we're shifting. So we as beings are shifting beings. Our emotions change all the time, our desires change. So it's hard trying to create something when our aspirations of what that might look like are changing because of our very nature as human beings, really. So it's
also about valuing things like somebody, I think it was Jane, was talking about air miles. Like, it's cheaper to catch a plane than it is to catch a train. That's just pure nonsense, and that's political choice. You mean there's no fair sort of thing? Like, surely the fuel on trains should be a lot cheaper than the fuel on planes, but it's completely the opposite way. That's the way they do it. So it needs to be a whole world view to change the system.
Thank you, everybody. I'll go in now back to our slides. So I didn't get to show my little slide of us doing an exercise. Well, that's us doing an exercise. Okay, so I thought I would have a think as we were doing, to consider some of the elements that for me would be ingredients in that pot of what a sustainable life could feel like. So for me, I think would be a greater sense of personal and social justice. And that sense of responsibility, you know, that it isn't just something that things need to be fair for me, things need to be fair for all of us. And we, as adults, as human beings, we need to both respect each other and the earth that we're living on, but also take responsibility as well. You know, that's part of should be part of being a human being, learning how to respect and take responsibility. And I think when we do that, then we can have real choice. Reinvigorating communities and personal connections. You know, I think so many people live, and well, I mean, it's changed with more people working from home, but even so, even though more people are working from home, are they able to reconnect into their communities? So can we reinvigorate communities? I think we might be working at home, but do we have more time to meet each other on the street, take part, join in things? So up until recently, a lot of us have been working away from home. We've been commuting to work or whatever. And we haven't been able to, we've lost the connections in neighbourhoods and in our community areas. The things that built community, where people lived, worked and played in the same area. You know, I was doing some work for the town council the other day about sports needs, and was reading about, you know, the clubs and stuff that used to be in our community. People would go to work, maybe as part of that work, they might have a works football team or a works cricket or rounders team or whatever. And people had more chance and more opportunity to do things locally. I was talking to my neighbour yesterday. He remembers when he started work and he just walked to work. He walked about a mile or so to work, and everybody did, or they cycled. Most people didn't have a car to work. So, I mean, this isn't that long ago. Well, a bit older, I think. So it's how to re-engage those personal connections and personal contact with each other. Greening everywhere, you know, looking at everywhere that we can grow stuff, grow food. So to help us, you know, apart from the fact it can look really nice, you know, to be in nature. And when you green things, nature comes. Birds, other animals, other species come, they've got a place to live too. And it also will help us to cut the carbon and store carbon. But it's a really nice place to be. We can maybe have a better connection with the food and learn how to grow food and learn about meeting our needs in a sort of an A to B thing, rather than, you know, meeting our needs via A, B, C, D, you know, to come back to where we want to go to, you know. That's something I realised many years ago. Where we lived to earn money to buy food, and when we could just buy food, just learn how to grow food or whatever. I mean, not as simplistic as that, but it's just showing that sometimes we've forgotten what it is, why we wanted that resource in the first place. So it's being able to remember. I think it's understanding our needs as well, what they really are. Listening to nature, sharing with other species, and understanding that being on the earth is being custodians of the earth. That's one of our roles, I see, as human beings, and respecting that earth that we're part of. Working less hours maybe, and having more time for each other, for loved ones, for friends and family. Learning to be with the idea of enough, that we've got enough money or enough food or enough clothes or enough pairs of shoes, or, that we don't have to have vast levels of resource. I don't know if other people experience this, but during COVID, I'm not a great shopper anyway, but I went out hard. A lot of people, and I think it was reported that a lot of people just didn't buy so much stuff, because we weren't going out to get dressed up and all the rest of it or whatever. So people stopped buying so much, and because it was so hard sometimes to get things, we actually learned to live with what we had. It was quite a revelation as well. More walking, cycling, I would see that as and more healthy opportunities to, for us to have more time to do that. Fundamental to me is also, because we don't exist in a vacuum as individuals. We might live in a society that keeps talking and celebrating the individual or the individual family, but actually we are beings that need to be together and we need to connect. It's fundamental to our nature. And part of that is that, to meet my needs, I need to be aware of them, but equally I can work with my friends, my neighbours, other people I don't know to collectively meet them. And as human beings, that's something we need to start doing more of, as well as understanding that we should all have an equal voice in how we make those decisions. So for me, the whole democratic processes really need to be participative processes that we can all take part in, and that we all take some level of responsibility. That comes back to what I was saying a moment ago. It's not just about living off the wealth of the earth, but taking responsibility to care for each other, for the earth, and be involved in collective decision making. Thinking about business, that it's important. I think somebody mentioned that business and people think about the consequences of our actions. That when the earth's resources aren't there just to fulfill our needs and our dreams and our aspirations, but actually they're here, they're valuable, and we need to value them, we need to respect them, and respect each other, and create kind of a virtuous circle of reciprocity, positive sharing, giving and receiving, but appreciating as well, and that whole life connection. And in terms of big decisions in our communities, in our country, that we all get a say and can take part in that, and move away from people speaking for us, as we have through representative democracy, to participative democracy, where we can speak for ourselves. So we need to learn how we can make decisions together in consensual ways where everybody can get heard. So there's some thoughts on that. Just going to pause for a second.
Just a few, Marion. Crikey.
Well, that's all. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of work on this. But the thing is that a lot of these are drawn from aspects coming from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and you'll see in a moment they're common to the vision coming out of agencies like the Transition Towns movement, etc. I think many of those people, I'll ask you, how many people understand those to be things that you might think of as being goals that you want to have for our communities?
We've got one thumbs up so far. Oh, two. Kevin's keeping it to himself. I'll put a thumbs up as well. Go on.
Or is it a load of rubbish? Is it just come out of Marion's head and doesn't make any sense?
A lot of the things that are on there, Marion, are what people have been saying in our sort of conflab before this in different ways. So
yeah, and that's it. These aren't just mine; they're a gathering of ideas and thoughts, really, and some of them are really echoed. You know, when the COP discussions happen, a lot of these come up quite a bit, particularly the whole thing about social justice for people and global justice. You know, it's all very well trying to cut the carbon and all the rest of it, but why expect the poorest people in the poorest countries to do it, or that they disappear first before we do anything about it as a planet? So there's some aspects of that question, really. So how do we, if those things we discussed a moment ago, if those things are the things that we want to be able to experience and the items I just shared, how do we get there from here? You know, does your heart sink when I ask you that question?
What's the question? Oh.
How do we get there? How do we get to those ways of living and being from where we are now? This is the transition, really. Okay, so making these changes can feel daunting, you know, cutting the CO2 emissions and changing the way we live, but how and where do we start? You know, obviously some of us have started quite a long time ago doing different things. Our ways of living have been with us a long time. How can we change these and change them quickly? Because we've been trying to change them, haven't we, for a few decades, but now the longer we leave it, the more quickly we have to do it. If only there was a map. If only someone had tried to do this before. Oh, they have. So obviously there's been lots of groups and communities over the last decade doing things to try and help and try and move us on, and change has come. Maybe not as much as we would all like, but it has come. But one movement that's been looking at these challenges since, is the Transition Towns movement. I'm going to talk a bit about that now. And we may have a gentleman coming to join us about that as well. So, I don't know if I'm going the right way now. Okay, so what does, can anybody see the title of this page? Because I've got the thing on the top and it blocks what I'm trying to see.
Transition Towns Movement, Marion.
Thank you very much, thank you. So the Transition Towns Movement is a community response to big challenges we're facing: climate change, peak oil, economic challenges. Started in 2005 in Totnes in Devon, and one of the leaders of that was a gentleman called Rob Hopkins. He's probably best known and associated with the Transition Towns Movement, but there are many other people that supported that transition from that process from the beginning. It's now a worldwide movement with over 1,400 communities across 50 countries working on the same challenge of how we get to where we want to be from where we are now. It's people creating sustainability by listening, reimagining, and then starting to take action. It's not about campaigning, it's about positive action, coming up with ideas. It's about revisioning where we live, taking practical action, and bringing our dreams to life. It's also about kind of bringing positive energy to the aspirations and the dreams that we have. So there's kind of 7 elements to successful transition, as the Transition Towns Movement identify them. So basically what Transition Towns have been doing over the years is communities coming together, deciding that they want to take action in response to the challenge, looking to create resilient communities and communities where we are responding to the climate challenges, we're responding to the changes that we're having in our communities, we're responding to the economic challenges and the social justice issues as well. To have successful transition, they really talk about we need healthy groups of people coming together. Rather, I'm going to pause there. We need to create healthy groups. So I don't know if you obviously a lot of us have been part of groups doing this work for many years. We need to learn how to work well together. And they put forward a model of how groups can work well together. Because I've been part of lots of groups, and often there's so many personality clashes and challenges, and people are thinking about things in different ways. And we're also not great necessarily in our communities with coping with conflict, or with coping with difference, or with coping with different directions of thoughts about differences of opinion and approach. So they put forward some, you know, they realized after a number of years that actually being able to create healthy groups with a sustainable plan about how they can go forward is a really positive thing to do. They spend a lot of time through the movement imagining the future that we want to co-create. And they use a process called backcasting. So if we want, say by 2035, if we went to 2035 and we imagined all the things that we were dreaming of and we talked about a few minutes ago existed by that time, we go to that time and then think back, how did that happen? What steps do we need to put in place to enable us to have been in that position? What actions if we're in 35 and we're looking backwards, what did we do when to make the world that we've wanted actually come to fruition? So envisaging that, thinking forward, but also backcasting and helping us to work out the steps that we need to take to make it happen. Getting communities involved. So, you know, a few of us will definitely experience being part of a small group that wants this to change. Obviously, we're Wellingborough Climate Action Project and we're a small group. I know there's members here from Climate Action West Northants. You may also be a small group. How do we get others to take part and want to take part in this process? How do we develop those relationships beyond our friends and our natural allies and get others from the community to join in? And then how do we build networks and partnerships across our communities and collaborate? A big part of the Transition Town movement is practical projects. And I think a lot of groups that have emerged over time since then have learned. I think I see with the Wellingborough Eco Group, that's really taken on the ideas from the spirit of the Transition Towns movement, which is not just campaigning, but taking action. And the power of taking, I think there's a book that's come up as part of the Transition Towns movement called The Power of Just Doing Stuff. And taking practical action and making difference in our community, it really helps us to feel that change can happen. And it also helps to release some of those really positive, innovative ideas that many people have, but that systems often discourage us from going forward with. So actually doing practical actions is a big element of transitioning to where we want to be. You know, not just waiting for permission from other people, or from government, but actually just taking action in that direction. Connecting with other groups as well, you know, the Transition Towns groups, obviously there's lots now across the world, and they've learned from each other. Different groups have been good at different things. Sometimes that's been based on where they happen to be in the world, you know. So many groups have been able to learn from each other about how to make change and bring in new ideas and new approaches to their own communities that they've seen happening in other communities, other transition movements. And a really big part of what they encourage us to do as part of that change, that journey of transition, is to reflect and to celebrate our wins. You know, might not feel like big wins, but to really celebrate what we're doing, because I don't know about you, you know, when you've been part of this thing for a long time, you can feel like you're losing a lot. Actually, can we celebrate what we are doing and how well we are achieving the fact that we actually get to do some of this project, get some funding to do some of our things, the steps that we take. And I've seen, you know, particularly obviously with the Wellingborough Eco Group, when those things are celebrated, the community appreciates it as well. You know, some of the most basic things like picking up litter have had a profound impact on our communities and are really appreciated. Maybe not appreciated by everyone, but appreciated by a lot of people. It actually feels like some success. So celebrating our successes is something they encourage. The qualities of transition really is about being positive and working on a kind of human scale to the response to the big challenges, whether it's climate change or you know, they talk a lot about peak oil through that process, through the transition movement, and also the big challenges around the economic challenges that we've been facing for many years, not just recently. So trying to help us to replace despair with hope. It nurtures a sense of caring and cooperation within the culture, within our communities. It's focused on connections with self, with others, with nature, starting to revision how we live, our economies, our ways of working, how we care for people, and unleashing our creativity and sparking entrepreneurship that can come from, you know, looking at things differently and trying new approaches. A big part of transitioning, if we want to live in more sustainable ways, is actually sometimes remembering some of the skills that really served us and our communities maybe 10, 15, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and reskilling ourselves, because if we're going to need to be more practical, if we're going to need to learn things that we've forgotten, you know, maybe it's not about living life on computers, she said, using a computer, but it might be some of the more practical things that people knew in the past that will help us to live more sustainably. So we need to reskill ourselves. And a big part of it is building those connections in our community. How do we share the challenge and create the solutions together? And it's being brave enough to challenge our common patterns in our community and ask ourselves, is working in this way, is living in this way really serving us? Is it really working for us anyway? You know, we live such a fast pace, but is this way that we're working, even if there wasn't a climate crisis, does it actually work for us anyway? Sorry, there's lots of lists here, you know. So some core principles really is aiming to, so the Transition Towns movement, and I guess the advice they would give to us to make the transition between here and there is to aim to create resilient, creative, nurturing lives and communities, and to move more from acting globally to acting locally. It doesn't mean only act locally. It means moving more to acting locally and getting back in balance, really, coming into balance with things and paying attention to balance in our lives, in our communities' lives as well. Respecting the resources of the earth and respecting each other, promoting inclusiveness and social justice for all, practice inclusive decision making. You know, I know sometimes we want to get decisions made and we want to do things quickly, but does it really serve us in the end? Because maybe we just, you know, they talk about, I think we've seen it a lot on the internet, haven't we? That a lot of people are just working together with people who agree with each other. You know, we're not really including people that we don't agree with and how they can be part of, it's not about even convincing them, it's about creating that vision where their voice gets heard too. So striving to engage, they talk about engaging the head, the heart and the hands. So how can we use our minds to create the new world that we want? But remember that this is more than anything. This is a heart journey to learning how to live more from the heart, more in balance with nature, more in balance with each other, but also being very practical and not just not waiting for permission, actually being able to give ourselves permission and take action. They also encourage us to remember that whatever we do between where we are now and where we want to get to, a lot of it's going to be an experiment because none of us have ever been in this position before. We might have had similar experiences on the earth, but maybe people have been in this position, but it might have been thousands and thousands of years ago. What messages have they left? But recent experience, whether it's COVID, whether it's various wars or the Second World War, has taught us a great deal. So how can we really learn from that? But also, how can we allow that going forward as we try things, we are trying things and it's okay to make mistakes. You know, what is wrong, you know, when we're going through something we've never been through before. They really encourage us to share ideas freely, to seek to collaborate and to cooperate and to foster that sense of creativity and positive action. Transition groups are tackling issues that we're facing. People are asking questions, how will we meet this and that need? And in a low carbon and a fossil free world, how are we going to live our lives? So firstly, they encourage us to allow some time to just appreciate how much of our lifestyles is built on cheap oil and on processes that emit a great deal of carbon dioxide, pretty much everything. As fossil fuels get more expensive, we cut CO2 emissions, how do we switch our systems to living to meet our needs more sustainably? So they're the big things that the movement's been working on. So just thinking about transitioning from where we are to where we want to be, in the transition movement, they talk about each community, encouraging each community, to create, this was originally anyway, create an energy descent plan. So basically showing how we can power down on our dependency on fossil fuels and at the same time reduce our CO2 equivalent emissions. And they point out it's not really about changing like with like. So, if we're moving from a petrol car to an EV, electric vehicle, that's not really going to help, because we're still using a lot of embodied energy to create those cars and they're still emitting things. So actually it's a lot about revisioning the way we live and fundamentally addressing the way we live. So, and going back to what Jane said quite a while ago, also about reducing our needs in the first place, our need for power, and really valuing, a lot of people have said that, appreciating what we already receive, what we're already experiencing. So, going back to Jonathan's analogy about food, if we're having a meal, being able to really enjoy that meal, really appreciate that meal as we eat it, and not just, eating on food with no taste, no flavor, and just to keep ourselves going, because it often doesn't help us to keep going. So it's reducing our need in the first place. When we talked a lot about saving energy, haven't we, in the last few weeks? And the first solution is cutting the amount of energy that we use now before we start looking at renewable options, etc. So it's really asking the question, do we still need this thing, or do we need that to make that at present? Is it still needed in our lives? Is it really essential to us? So, well, what is powering down? Well, it's the whole idea of, we're using a lot of fossil fuels and stuff to sustain life that isn't possible, that the earth is no longer able to sustain because of the way we've been living. So if we tried to do like with like, it would be, we're trying to transfer the water from a bucket into a pint glass. Or from a quart to a pint glass, it just doesn't work. So we have to change the amount of energy that we're using in the first place. So powering down is also powering down on the ways of being that don't serve us. So it's really taking some time to work out, well, is running around like a busy person all the time actually serving us, actually helping us? I know when I was learning Tai Chi years ago, they showed us that actually a lot of movements we have in our lives are just a waste. So it's working out what is really helping us in our lives and helping us to meet our needs, helping us to have a good life, working those things out really. So it's powering down on the ways of being that don't serve us and powering up on the ways of being, the practical solutions that we want to experience more of. So powering down could be powering down on energy and fossil fuel use, cutting down on CO2 emissions, cutting down the factory farming processes. I think I wrote that after listening to the talk last night. Traveling, do we need to travel so far to work so often? Do we need to work so far from where we actually live? Moving away from the industrialized healthcare, food production, and various other systems that we have in our lives, where we've been moving those systems away from us. We get less experience of being part of those part of an education process where we actually really grow, you know, and just sort of feeling like you're going through a mill all the time. So can we have a process that actually feels positive for us? So cutting down the stuff that we don't want, cutting down on the sense of competition. I'm not saying competition's a bad thing, but when competition is the only thing, there is a problem. So maybe we need to reduce that much more. Mass production of everything. Do we need the mass production of everything? And having lives which are so individualized and independent lives, which kind of works against our nature. So it's actually powering down on those elements, but powering up on other elements. So powering up on the use of renewable energy to meet our energy needs that we actually want to meet, cooperating, sharing the way we meet our needs, maybe working closer to home. So that's giving ourselves more time. So less work, but more family and time with friends. Rebuilding our communities and our connectedness, so powering up on that. Powering up on learning new skills for a resilient way of living, you know, rewarding our contributions, feeling, you know, rewarding the contributions of ourselves and people in our communities better and fairer, and valuing each other, nature and communities. I mean, a lot of people do so much work in our communities, but often their contributions are just, oh, well, you're volunteering, that's okay, you know, and we don't really appreciate it. So it would be nice to really appreciate the way, I think it's called, I'm not sure it's called the core economy, that part of our lives where we do stuff for each other for free. You know, we bring up our children, we care for our families for free. We care for our loved ones for free. If the state had to pay for all the care provided to loved ones, particularly children, but also older parents or loved ones, it would cost a fortune, but we do it all for free, but we don't necessarily value it. There's a lot of people's work and contributions in our community we don't value. So we need to really value the things that actually add quality to our lives. And I think maybe a lot of people experience that through COVID, not being able to be with the people that we loved, you know, was really, really difficult. And it helped people to really reassess, I think, you know, what's important. So building into those things, maybe being involved in growing our own food and connecting to that process of meeting that essential need. So powering up on that. And most importantly, powering up on the sense of interdependence. You know, the fact that we are not islands and that we might live on an island, but we are not islands and we need to live together. And that's so much more important when we live in communities where we're living on top of each other. Learning how to do that well becomes even more powerful. So Transition Towns groups did a lot of work. I mean, they started in 2005, and over the last 15 years, they've looked at every part of our lives and how we can transition to meeting the needs related to these parts of our lives in more sustainable ways. So there's lots of research that's been done, and they provide, the transmission movement provides lots of models about how to make this happen, but it's not the only place, the only people that have been doing that work. So there's thoughts about, and much of the work that was done has now been reflected in life in our communities because it's come forward anyway. You know, talking about renewable power 15, 20 years ago was you started to see more people thinking about how to do that, but it's becoming more accepted that that's the way we have to go now. And a lot of that's come from this movement, but also other practical movements in our communities. So it's looked at all different aspects of our lives. And at the center of this is also the heart and the soul journey, the fact that the way we live is often to do with things that we've experienced, the way we've grown up. And to make the changes in some way, the bottom line is if this was easy, we'd all have done it ages ago, but it's not, because many of us have vested interests in some part of these systems carrying on. So understanding what those vested interests are, and I think Harry was trying to allude to that earlier, what those emotional vested interests are in ourselves is really important. One of my experiences being part of a Transition Towns group was that there were some people that wanted to do the practical stuff, wanted to get on with the energy projects or travel or transport or food, and others understood as well that actually our motivations for doing things, what's happening in our hearts, how we feel about everything is also fundamental to how we live as well. So what's been interesting in the groups, if you took part in them, and I think we've seen this in other groups as well, is that people are drawn to different areas of the process, but we don't all have to do the work in the same areas. And that's what kind of emerged from the transition movement, is some people's focused on some things, other people focused on others. The important thing was to share it throughout that. So there's various elements in there, and also people have been thinking about transition politics, which some of us on this call might find interesting. So how would we do politics or decision making differently? And obviously I talked about that a little bit earlier.
Will we not get back to how the Green Party used to be, i.e. sort of run locally and then sort of built on a consensus nationally rather than top down? Yeah, so I mean, just going back to that politics and decision making, the thing about everyone taking part, I can't say the word now, is really important to moving forward together, because we've got some really big changes to make, and people being able and enabled, supported to take part. And that's going to be a journey, because a lot of us have lost faith in how we make decisions in our communities. A lot of us feel done to, particularly in this county, by our local authorities and stuff. And we've lost faith in ever being heard, and ever being even if we've got a good idea, so actually how we work on that is going to be really important. And there have been some approaches to that. I know there's the flat pack democracy I'm looking up, because there's a book on my shelf about that. That's where communities decided to stand as independents and look at how to run a town council differently, move away from the political party structures. So there's lots of different areas that the Transition Towns movement has been focusing on, and it offers models for communities, any community around the world, to look at this and think, well, yeah, so how could we do that in our area? They talk about head, heart, and hands. So changing the way we live involves all these parts of us, not just one part of us. So thinking through the challenges, feeling and hearing the ways we want to live, planning how we might change things together, taking practical actions. But big change and loss is hard on the heart. Big transitions, it can be challenging. It brings up a lot of emotions and resistance. Caring for ourselves through the change is really important. And I was pleased to read again that they've put more energy now for the Transition Network into helping people to take time in this process as activists in a community to nurture ourselves. It's funny, around sustainability, we think about a lot of things to do with sustainability, but we often don't think about our own sustainability and our own ability to give energy to the work that we're doing. And we can get burnt out often because we care a lot. So how to make change and still care, how to sustain our work is really important. So, I'm not going to go through all these, but these are some examples of practical actions that transition communities have done. But I mean, and I say transition communities have been around so long now that lots of other groups are doing similar things because those actions have become more common. So obviously, like setting up local organic food buying groups and growing groups, running classes to help people learn new skills. I talked about backcasting earlier to help people vision how to change, because sometimes it's not easy to do that. Some communities have started to create community energy generation projects and worked on that. I know Totnes, that was a big thing they wanted to do at the beginning. Totnes also created the Totnes pound, so it's having local currencies to try and keep energy and money moving around that community and not being lost out to the world, and so we can invest in those communities. Cleaning areas, cleaning up our towns, rewilding, etc. So lots of different things have been done by various
transition groups, and there's more to come. But as they've shown, it's important, it's as important how we do stuff as well as that we do stuff, and learning how to do it in a way that we don't lose people because we fall out with each other, or we're burnt out, is still a skill for many of us to acquire, I think. Okay, so this is the point at which we'd be hearing from David, but I don't think he's arrived yet, has he, Jonathan?
He's not arrived. I have emailed him. Like I say, at a meeting that was finishing at 8, it could well have gone on, like some of our meetings do occasionally. So
yeah, fair enough.
That's probably what's happened.
I did this slide in case he didn't come, but so my experience with the transition towns or with transition initiatives really started in New Zealand in 2006. So just a little bit on that. I first heard about transition in the UK in Stroud. I became a member of, we created a transition group in Market Harborough in 2006, 2007. And we were the 22nd registered. So remember I said there was 1,400 transition communities, and we were the 22nd registered community back in that time. And we went on the first ever transition training that the network created, and the transition conference. And at that time, people were encouraged to create a 12-step plan of how to get on this journey. And a lot of those steps are really helpful to know. I won't go through them now, but you can have a look. What's that title of that one? Transition?
Tools and films.
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about all of this, but actually there's some really good materials, and we may not choose, there's a lot we can learn from the transition movement. It has worked on some of the things that we need to work on. There's a lot to draw from it. We don't have to do it necessarily in the same way, but there's some really good resources to read through and see. And they've done quite a few films, and people might want to watch the films on their own, but there is the newest film. It's called Transition 2.0. So in other words, how to do it after reflecting on it for about 10 years. That's this film here on this YouTube link. It's about an hour long, and maybe that's something if people wanted to watch that together sometime, or if you just want to watch it on your own. But it's really good. Describing all this verbally just doesn't do any of it justice, really. Watching what people have done and how it feels for them and how they've been able to make change in their own area is something that I've been able to catch in these films, and it's worthwhile seeing that. And there's some really good, this is the link for the Transition Network, just there. And also this is the guide that they've now created to help people who are seeing how to transition to more sustainable lives. So there's a lot we can learn from those resources and many, many more. In terms of transition communities locally, so Market Harbour Transition Town became Sustainable Harborough and was able to draw down, in working partnership with the voluntary sector, was able to access £1 million of resource to bring a lot of the ideas to life. And they did a phenomenal job. This is sort of the early, I'm not sure when that happens, but sort of the early 2010, 2011, 2012 sort of period. And 5 years of money to help set up various actions and projects and groups to bring about this change. And there's a lot of resources from that work on that link on that website. So it's really worth looking at. And whilst looking at it, I noticed that, because one of the things when I was part of that group that many people were keen on was, it was about food buying groups, but also about generating community energy. And I see they've started to do that work in Market Harbour now with the Harbour Energy Group. There's a Transition Towns Oundle group, which has been going for a few years, and Transition Kingscliff, and we were hoping to get a speaker to join us from that group. There's also Transition Stamford, and there was Transition Northampton, which is, it may still be around, it's sort of in abeyance, I think, and that's the group that David was going to come from. So there's a few groups around us to take ideas from. Transition business, I was looking at, there's an idea there about entrepreneurs getting together and sort of coming up with how can we invest in each other and invest in community ideas approach. And that's that there was a lot of work done around how to transition business to be more ethically based, as well as obviously working in ways which were collaborative, etc., that we talked about earlier. So what can we learn from the transition movement? Well, basically there is a plan, there are plans, there are ways that we can transition, and we can draw on the work that's been written down and the stories that have been told and learnt from the journeys that those people have been making. We can learn from that. We can learn from how they've been doing it as well. They've had time to reflect. So thought through many of the big challenges and the big changes and issues already. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, really. They provide great advice on how to create a sort of mass community-led grassroots movement of change, and lots of techniques about how to keep that connected and help people to build that network around the world, because it's a phenomenal thing that's been possible. And I think a lot of those communities have made change in their areas, which have been reflected in the global changes we've been able to bring forward. So they show that really we don't need to wait for governments or local government to take action. We can take action, but obviously many of us would like to do that collaboratively, and there's work that they've been doing with councils to try and come up with a collaborative approach. Talked about how we can support each other in groups to make the change and sustain ourselves, you know, giving us blueprints for making plans to reduce the energy that we're using, and how to make the process of change engaging and fun. How to respect each other on that journey, involve each other and hear each other in the journey, and recognizing the importance and the impact on our hearts and the inner transition journey that goes on as we're doing this change, and really inspire our creativity as well. So there's some of the positive things that we can learn from the work those communities have done. Just on the whole thing of co-leading the process, because one anxiety there was for me around, you know, there's a climate emergency, how do we respond to it? We've got to wait for government or local government. But, you know, I've been concerned because, you know, many perhaps where I'm not being that happy at the way local government works in our area. A lot of us just don't feel heard by local government. It's taken a long time to get the local government to even take notice of these particular challenges. And the challenges are so big that it's too big for local government to do on its own. So it's really important that communities can take part in this, and that we have an equal voice in how things get changed and how we make change happen alongside councils of government. So I mean, many of us have felt done to in this county and done to in our areas. So with the big changes, we need that voice. Okay, so can you read the title, Jonathan?
I can. Would you like me to read it out? I'm joking, Marion. How do you feel we could co-lead this transition with councils, business, communities?
So what do people think? You know, is it something you're quite happy for councils and government to lead, or is it really important that we are as fundamental a part of that process as anybody and any other entity? What do people think? I'll just stop sharing for a minute.
Well, I can talk to that.
John and Greg.
Well, I had a meeting with some people today, and it was actually very important for the well-being of the community to get involved, even no matter how they feel about a council or what the council has done to them in the past. These people that I was talking to and myself believe that the way forward is to engage and to facilitate the community, because the community can do much more than the council can do, much, much more.
Okay, anybody else got any thoughts on?
I completely agree with that. I think one of the things that we've been constantly saying to West Northamptonshire Council is you need to engage more with your communities, you need to engage more with parish and town councils, because actually there are people out there who are already trying to do the same things that you want to do. And in many cases, they're doing it for free. So why would you not take advantage of that? I think they're to a degree scared of losing control or being exposed as not knowing what they're doing about everything. But actually, nobody knows what they're doing because this is all new ground. Every step we take could be in the wrong direction, but we need to start taking steps. So yeah, it's very important.
Have you got any thoughts on this, Harry?
With Greg here, I don't want to be rude.
What, sorry?
but our experience in South Northamptonshire, not West Northamptonshire, but our own district, is that we had a master plan for Towcester, which was totally ignored. And the community is completely disinterested. So I don't really get a community to engage when all it says is we don't want this, we don't want this, we don't want this. We were given a blueprint of what we could have had, and when the council rode a coach and horses through the plan, no one seemed to worry about it.
Didn't we have a nice thing? I can't remember what they were called now, Harry, but we did something in 2015 where we had the hall or whatever it is in the middle of Towcester. We invited a few people along. I know we had one in Wellingborough too. And that seemed to get people a bit more engaged in sort of community and...
Yes. Yeah. 18, was it? 24 turned up?
Yeah, I didn't think it was a bad start, but yeah.
And so I hold myself guilty then of not doing more about it, other than working with people like Jane and others down here. But it is the private agenda of our elected representatives that are contradictory to everything that I believe we need. We are dealing with collective greed and a vision of what's important in terms of letting the market decide. It's truly unsustainable. I mean, if the definition of sustainable is to make sure that the things we do today don't compromise what can be done tomorrow, South Northamptonshire, let me just be very particular because I know about it, have compromised the ability of this region to do a great deal, crisscrossed with trunk roads, warehouse building completely out of control, guaranteed that logistics will be based here until logistics stops to be required. Very, very low levels of skill required. And at the same time, we're told that we want a high-wage, high-skilled community. And the homes that are being built today cannot be occupied by people who aren't. I despair. So I don't want to be negative. I think the only way we're going to get things done is exactly as the way Climate Action West Northamptonshire is actually doing it, which is do it for ourselves. And if the council wants to give us help, that would be brilliant. But if they get in their way, we'll make sure that the community understands that we can't achieve what we want to achieve because of obstruction. And we don't get obstruction. In fact, I think Jane's right. They don't really have a clue about what they want to do. And when they do try to do it, like putting active travel into the streets of Northampton, they do it in such a ham-fisted way that it gets up everybody's nose, including the people who might have been supportive. There is a lack of. So I'm sorry, Greg, because you may know all these people, but there's just such a lack of competence.
Yeah.
I've finished.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think, you know, we're doing this project here in Wellingborough, and, you know, one of the motivations for doing it was to try and galvanise people, communities and the councils to work together to see how we can tackle these challenges that are now an emergency, and so many emergencies evolve from them as well. You know, the whole cost of living crisis is also evolving from the lack of action around movements to, for example, to renewable energy. It's not just about that, though, is it? But so how do we, and our vision is that we can collaborate as communities, business, organisations, councils. So do people think that's a worthwhile thing to do? Yes, I guess, but is it likely that we can achieve it? I hope so, but, you know, a lot of us have been here before, haven't we? We're trying to work with local government, but I'm sorry you have to hear this, Greg, but, you know, I think this goes back to what Harry said way back about the emotional challenges of what we're trying to do and why people act in particular ways. You know, I think we're moving to try and make big change, and we want to do that, but we're also taking our emotions, our baggage with us, but we're still trying to, because we see the urgency really of the situation. Jane?
Yeah, I think for me also, you can't hold local government entirely accountable, because they are to a large extent guided by what central government asks them to do, and they're not currently being given the right guidance. They're not being given any clear direction. Really, they need to be given a mandate to do what they need to do. Currently, in order to do that, they'd have to be exceptionally motivated and innovative, because the system doesn't exist to allow them to do that. Yeah, and I'm not saying they couldn't do better. I think particularly in terms of some of the politicians within West Northamptonshire, they are not committed to making change because it wouldn't benefit them to change.
That's political choices again, though, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And again, they need to be clearly directed to say, this is what you must do.
We've had that locally, like between like Wellingborough and say Kettering. And Kettering seems to have embraced a lot more sort of green ways of thinking, for eco ways of thinking than Wellingborough ever has, because it's been stuck in the past, not necessarily by the people that are living here, but by our political representatives.
Yeah, can I mention here quickly that I was in a 1.5-hour meeting with people from around the country. It was in a meeting organised by UK 100, and they've got a website. And I think I can send you a copy, Marion, of all the web links.
Yeah.
You'll find it very useful. I can't send you summaries because I haven't had time, but I can get those through to you. But mostly it's all about how the UK 100 and the LGA are trying to say to central government, devolve some of the powers so that local government can take, say, a 2-year pot of money in one go, and then sit there and work out with councillors and the community and officers what can be done. A 2-year pot of money is quite a big sum, and they can get quite a bit done. But what's happening at the moment, and it's been happening for a very long time. I mean, I heard all the problems today. It's just so many I can't remember. But they are trying to solve them. But one of them is councils have all got to do the same thing, which is climate change, adaptation and mitigation of the risks. But we've all got to compete for the same money.
Yeah.
And everyone that climbed up there, these are chief execs and very senior people saying it's nuts. It's got to change, but maybe it won't. So that's what I'm on the side of the UK 100 and LGA on that.
So with given the context, then how can we move forward on this? How can we carry on doing our work in our communities and bring people together?
Oh, that could carry on.
How can we
carry on? It's
local
government.
Yeah, I'm just talking about in our area, whether it's Wellingborough, East Northants, other parts of North Northants. How do we carry on? You know, because it's that co-leadership of the process, and in a way, maybe it's communities that are pushing things forward and finding pots of money here, a bit of help there, whatever, to get the conversation going. So
pushing where you can, I would say, trying to get bits of money. Ideally, you'd like to be able to get a bit of money here, a bit of money there, and save it. But the system is made so that you have to spend it and report back as you spend it. You can't save the money to do something slightly bigger, which is very similar to what the community expect local government to do. So if have this big pot of money and then go and spend it on big projects, but it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, so if we could get the councils to come to the table, I mean, the other question is, what would we all do together?
The laws have to change. There's planning laws. It's not the fault of planning laws, but I mean planning staff. But there are laws out there that prevent a lot of things from being done the way that they need to be done in a collaborative way.
Okay, I'm just mindful of the time. We've gone past 9. Just to say, I did find a piece of work that the transition communities have been doing with councils, and I've put a couple of links on here to those projects that they've been doing with what they call municipalities, and how they've been able to collaborate together. So they're worth having a look at. I mean, here's a few ideas of what councils could do to work with communities, whether it's this group or any other group in our area or across the country, really. But these are some thoughts about empowering and supporting people and communities to respond. I mean, we were at a meeting the other week, weren't we, Greg, you know, where we've been working with Wellingborough Town Council, and, you know, we were thinking, well, we were coming up with a bit of some thoughts about what the councils could do to help that process. And I think you were saying something about, you know, if each council had a pot of money to give to each community to set up groups like the one in West Northants, like this one in our area, to initiate these sorts of actions in the community, these sorts of projects, that would be a really positive thing that a council could start to do. Yeah, well, they have to do work themselves, but they can just provide some resource to unleash the enthusiasm of people from communities.
Little incubators. That's what they are. They're little incubators for. It's like almost like a baby being born. These are all the parts of the baby being put together, and these can then in 9 months' time be used again and again and again for other people to copy, so they can create their own babies.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Harry, you had your hand up?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Talking about funding, and it's just interim. There was the whole fiasco with home improvement funding. If there was backcasting of any substance and looking at what needed to be in place to achieve whatever it was that we've envisioned 25 years hence, we could have working groups on what Boris calls shovel-ready projects. So all the thinking can be done. And then when somebody magics up a 2-year funding opportunity, you're completely there with everything in place to make use of that funding and then deliver it. So rather than piecemeal action, it's all part of planning for the future, that we've thought about what we need to have at a particular point in time. And when the opportunity arises, we just grab it. And no one does that, as far as I can see. And I think that's the most important thing that us in the West Northamptonshire has to do. We have to look at what we need, prepare the ground for grabbing the funding. It's great that there would be this kind of incubator here, but what are we going to incubate? We need to know where we're going so that we can slot that baby into the toddler emerging into the reality that we want in 25 years' time.
Thank you. Just a couple more.
I think possibly whilst you're changing your slide is we've got to kind of get away from expecting councils to be paying us almost. I know we want us all to be paid and all the rest of it, but like Wellingborough Eco Group exists because we do it in spite of the council. We got told it wasn't going to happen, so we did it ourselves basically. And that's hey, hold on a second, there's David, he's just turned up. There's our speaker.
Let's say that David has arrived.
That is but that I think is where you've got to go. And then if funding does turn up and we can get funding to grow whatever we're trying to do, then that's a bonus. At least we've got the platform then to build on.
I've got a couple of this and another slide to go through, and then I'll just welcome David. Sorry, David, I can't see you properly, but I mean, we are about to finish, but I'll come back to you in a moment if that's okay. So one thing that they were looking about in Wellingborough is thinking about citizens' assemblies as an option of actually getting people together and trying to get people to discuss the challenges anyway, not as an organising forum, but as a way of getting people together. And we've been thinking about, you know, as part of this project, establishing a kind of community transition forum as part of our work, pulling people together to discuss this and see how we move forward, and maybe doing some of that, definitely doing some of that thinking that you've been talking about, Harry, the sort of actions and projects we need to be at least identifying, even if we can't take that action, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for joining us anyway, David.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. You've done the hard bit. The easy bit for me is to say that Northampton's transition is just restarting basically after COVID. We've kept ourselves alive with Zooms, so many groups have. In that period, we've joined up with Cord, which is I think going to be very productive for us and hopefully a bit for them. Jane, Harry and I are sick of the sight of each other on a Zoom screen, but yeah, that's how it is. Yeah, I've reached the point, sorry, also West Northampton Sustainable Food Partnership. I've kept going with that as well. So the thing that, where I am at the moment is a bit where Jonathan alluded to a few minutes ago, is doing things in spite of, I don't know whether it was Harry or someone pointed me in the direction of Shropshire, work their climate partnership, I think it's called. So I'm a bit late and the brain's not as young as it used to be. But Shropshire held a public meeting. They had Paul Allen from Centre for Alternative Technology as their guest speaker. He was so inspirational that they've gone from strength to strength and are very active and doing very, very good stuff. So where I am, and I'm hoping that my transitioners will come with me, is to set that sort of meeting up. I'm not sure whether it be for Northampton, for West Northants, whether we do it on our own or with Corn or any other partners we can bring in on that. But we're determined to actually get it cracking. It looks as if you may have be on the same sort of journey. I think we cannot wait for the public to come to us. We have to go to them. I wouldn't write councils off, especially if we've got Greg Haynes join us. I don't want to write him off. They are important players, and we need to work with them. That's where I am at the moment in shorthand. Just reached that sort of conclusion that that's the way we need to go, and that's the pace we need to work at. We haven't got 2 years to set this up. It's really got to be in the September, October time frame. But yeah, that's as much as I really want to say. Is you've done the hard work, Marion.
Just one thing on Shropshire Climate Action Group. I was really inspired to see what they've done, and I know they've been doing a project with CAT, you know, the Centre for Alternative Technology, and they'd helped them identify. I think they got some extra resource to do that, so that was a really good thing. Just on and if you're planning anything in relation to that, I mean, I did get in touch with CAT to see if, I think, was it their aim is work around achieving net zero Britain or something as a catchy name for their project, and I did write to them to see if they were up for working with other climate action groups, and I think I got a bit of a response, but it's not been able to connect with that person since, the woman that worked with them. But if you are looking to connect with them as well, it would be something we would like to do too, so it could be a joint thing that we could do.
Sounds promising. I've been a CAT member for more years than I care to remember. I don't know if anybody else has, but yeah, the last time I asked Paul about doing something like this, it was sort of, yeah, that's fine, it's £300 or £400 and an overnight stay in a hotel. And at that time, we just didn't have that sort of money. So but this year, we don't have that sort of money, but we're going to find it somehow.
So if, it would be good to hear your experience in setting up the Transition Northampton group and some of the sorts of things you've been able, I mean, when did it start, and what were the sorts of things that the projects you've been able to work on in Northampton?
It started with me, a table and a Transition Town Northampton banner, music festival on the racecourse, all on my own with clipboard. We went from strength to strength in a way in which we had sort of around 200 people on our mailing list, as it were. We currently we've restarted our monthly litter pick. We're about to restart our what we did call Cash Mob, which was sending on a local shop in the town, local business, to actually spend a little money and give them a plug once a month. And we organised a cycling and walking festival a couple of years ago with £3,000 from Northampton Community Foundation. That's on the race course. It didn't attract as many people as we hoped. The cycling fraternity didn't get on board with it. But those that came got something out of it. And yeah, it was disappointing in numbers, but it was quite good. What else are we doing? Obviously, we've been attending shows and fetes and fairs and things, and spreading the word. Done some leaflets, 10 easy ways to cut your carbon footprint, and handed them out. Half of A5 is, but probably A6, I guess, size to keep the waste down. Yeah, we've been invited to join Northampton Town Council's Climate Forum. That looks quite a promising group of councillors who seem to really have the environment at the forefront of their mind, and they are, as a council, not just in that area, but they have a grants. They're the biggest parish council in the country, so they have a bit more money than most, and they're doing a grants award scheme with some of the money they have. Some of which the Climate Forum will be able to access. So yeah, we're working with Councillor Marriott Robertson. Robertson Marriott.
Robertson Marriott, but she's not actually a councillor.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
she's an activist on the Climate Forum, and she's looking to she's looking for a green avenue down at Abington Street, trying to green the town centre. We've been talking about all the other spaces in Northampton town centre. When you start looking around Northampton altogether, there's so much opportunity to do more. But even in the town centre, there's behind the shops, there's little areas of green that can be enhanced and grown. So yeah, we're up and running again, but we're still we are now quite small, under 100 on the email list, and half a dozen active. So yeah, we're back out there and wanting to grow and wanting to get on with stuff. Don't know whether that tells you enough, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much for joining us, David.
I'm sorry I was late, but the other meeting went on. You know how it is. This one's my fault, but yeah.
That's fine. Okay. So,
any questions? Obviously, happy to take.
Yeah. Are there any questions for David?
Looks like Greg's got a question.
You moved, Greg. You're in trouble. You've got to have a question now.
Adopt a green space, Greg's put on the chat.
I've got a question, I guess. Okay. But yeah. I think we probably will discuss this separately anyway, David. But I feel really strongly that there is a need to talk to people who aren't already listening, if you know what I mean. So for any type of event or meeting or whatever you want to do, the huge question, which I am not sure anyone has found the answer to, is how do you attract people who aren't already part of your audience? How do you reach a new audience? That's really difficult. You have to offer them something that they want. And they clearly don't want to listen to people like us talking about climate change.
Well, the big enticer for anybody to go to any sort of meeting usually is food, I always say. So if you offer them food and a soft drink, you can gather some people in. Seriously, I think we've got to work with groups like the WI, Townswomen's Guild, Scouts, churches, all those sort of organisations. They're probably the people who are doing stuff already. If you want something doing, go to a busy person, they say. So look for busy people, but also just open it up. If we can get the Quan on the radio to actually talk to us and give us some space, then yeah, it cannot be closed. And a big venue with food and an open invitation to the town. If we get 1,000, I'll be desperately happy, even though in trouble on the day. But yeah, if we can get a couple hundred people to turn up in a big space, then with a facilitator. That's the other thing. I'm not expert at facilitating these things, but there are groups that are. And CAT is one, and there are others that would do it. So,
and I think one of the other things, sorry to hog you the conversation, but one of the other things that groups like us can do in the sort of interim between now and when everyone else catches up with where we want to be is we can upskill ourselves. And that would include in things like facilitation. We can find out about the different projects that need to be done. So again, we are sort of ready to go.
Yeah,
when the time comes.
We have the RSPB, Friends of the Earth. I wouldn't shy away from inviting political parties. The Green Party, my own party, the Lib Dems. There's quite a strong green theme with the Lib Dems. But we need Labour and we need the Conservatives. There's no shying away from that either. We've got to involve by invitation, and if they don't come, that's fine. It's all and sundry. One of the things you can do is, once we get an idea of what we're going to do, even if it's the venue and the date is not secure, we can start bigging it up and advertising it and shouting about it. It's coming, you've got to be there, all that sort of stuff. I will try and persuade my party to give us some free advertising space in their literature if they ever get off their backsides and deliver some. Yeah, the options are there.
I think something like a sustainability fair or something that captures people's imagination, particularly as people are trying to find information in order to make changes that they want to make anyway.
Yeah.
You know, things that can showcase opportunities, solutions, like some of the topics we've covered on some of these workshops, where people have got a vested interest in finding answers, then that'd be really good. Harry, you had a question?
No, sorry, it wasn't a question.
One last thing on that. Just, it's gone out of my mind. Harry, go on.
I do apologise, David.
No, it's all right.
Sorry.
No,
I know how easy it is to lose things these days.
It's an age thing.
We were talking earlier about not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
An organisation called Climate Outreach, and they did a really magnificent job of explaining, at least in a way that I could understand it, how to frame messages to different audiences. So they have segmented the population of our country. And if we're going to reach beyond the people that we are here tonight with, you know, the wider audiences, we do need to understand how to frame messages for people who are not like us. And I put a link in there to the download. I hope it's the right link. I just sort of found it and pasted it. But we need to understand how what's the expression? What makes other people tick, and what turns them on, and what turns them off. And for the bit that I've been political over the last few years, I have found more off switches than on switches when I'm talking to people. And it isn't just a question of listening, because the only people who want to talk to people if you're in the street are people. They're not the people that you're trying to reach. They're just people who enjoy talking. So no matter how good a listener one is, if the audience, if you've been an audience to someone who just likes talking, you've not really achieved a great deal when you're out in public. This is not the same as when we are putting adverts into newspapers. What are we saying in that advert? Who are we addressing? What words are we using? What images are we presenting? And it's all written in that book. We don't have to reinvent anything. It's all researched and it's academically supported.
Thank you for that. Certainly, I'd like to take the message out to the groups that I was talking about. And we have to remember that, I don't know, 60+% of the population do have a concern about climate change. We're not talking to, you know, if we can get 60 out of 100 to actually listen to us, that would be a miracle. But there are a lot of people out there that are receptive. And Harry, you just said, get the message right. So yeah, I'll go with that, and I'll have a look at Climate Outreach. Yeah.
Good. Greg's just posted a message. I know we're going about 2 minutes ago about a second climate change webinar for NNC. Do you want to say anything about that, Greg, before we go, or are you stunned into silence?
You're muted, Greg.
If you go onto the council's website and you type in climate, I'm trying to find a link now. I'll send it just now. But if you haven't seen NN Climate 21 already, which is a grueling 5 hours of climate change stuff that the council has already done in all the time before I joined the council, I helped put it together as well. There's a lot of stuff in there, but at that time, I wasn't really involved in choosing the people in the groups that were represented. And I may very well be part of that group of people that select the topics that need to be put on for this year's webinar. If we have one this year, I'm not sure if we're going to have one yet, but it'll more than likely be a virtual one. So it'll be online. So you'll have to send slides into NNC, and then wherever your office is, wherever your office is, then you just do the webinar from your home, say, and then ask them to move on to the next slide, that sort of thing. But you'll see that in the in Climate 21 from November 16th last year. Let me find
Okay,
that.
it's actually, Greg, it's actually on the WCAP website.
Oh, good.
We've got links to all of it on the
Good on you.
WCAP
Well done.
website. So Jonathan's just put the link on the website address on the chat. People see that? Or it's wcap.org.uk anyway. So I am going to have to draw things to a close. Thank you very much to everybody for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I noticed there's about 86 different messages on the chat, so there's a lot of chatting going on. I hope you enjoyed the slides as well. I know there's a lot of material there, but thank you to everybody for coming and for David joining us for the last few minutes. The next session we're doing is about sustainable housing and building business premises. Lots of things to do with that. And Jonathan will be leading that one. So that's in 2 weeks' time. We can talk about that. That's in 2 weeks' time. So 2 weeks from today, which was that the 3rd? I can't remember the date of that now. Anyway.
It's the 14th, so it'll be the 28th.
Yeah, so it's anyway, it's then. So anyway, we look forward to seeing you then. If you have any other thoughts, ideas, or any information you want to share, then please email it through, and anything useful we will put on the website. Jonathan's been doing a great job sharing lots of things that we're finding through the website. And so by the end of the year that we have a very good resource that people can draw on anyway. So, but thank you everybody. And unless there's anything burning that anyone wants to say before we finish, we'll see.
Thank you very much, Marion, and you, Jonathan, too.
Yeah, thank you
really
very much
appreciate the work you're putting in.
Thank you everybody for coming. Yeah, been
Good
fab.
to meet
Thank
you all.
Yeah.
Like to stay in touch with your meetings.
Yeah, please come and join in, David. Thank you. Bye everybody, and have a good rest of the evening. Take care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you. See you later.
Bye.